think we're going to go ahead and get started, and as people join, they'll be able to catch up. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the International Relations Council's International Career Series. My name is Natalie Friend. I'm the Global Education Intern for the IRC. For those unfamiliar, the IRC is a nonpartisan organization, apolitical, that provides a platform for greater understanding of international topics and how they intersect with the Kansas City community. With the permission of all of our participants, we will be recording today's event and broadcasting it live on Facebook. If you do not want to be featured in the recording, please feel free to mute your audio or turn off your camera now. Today, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Rick Randolph as Chief Medical Officer for Heart to Heart International. Dr. Randolph oversees their global health initiatives. His experience includes leading disaster response teams in Haiti and the Philippines as a volunteer, medical exchanges through Rotary International in Kenya and Uganda, providing primary care medicine in Senegal, Haiti, Kenya, and Uganda as well. And in 2015 and 2016, he also volunteered as Chief Medical Officer at one of Liberia's Ebola treatment units. It is safe to say that Dr. Randolph is fully engaged in the international healthcare experience, and we thank you, Dr. Randolph, so much for giving us some of your time today. For this event, please feel free to pose your questions through the Submit a Question feature at the bottom of your screen. I'll do my best to get to as many of them as possible. In the sidebar, there will also be a link to the IRC website if you're interested in joining as a member or receiving our newsletter. Thank you, and please welcome Dr. Randolph.
Thank you, Natalie. I've been Chief Medical Officer at Heart to Heart for the last 5 years, and I volunteered there regularly for 5 years before that. But I had a lot of involvement internationally before that, and I'd like to go over I'd like to structure this talk by describing a little bit of what I do for Heart to Heart first, and then going back and weaving in some of the parts and experiences that really led me to this, this position. So very first thing that really brought me into Heart to Heart was Haiti. I, along with the medical team from Heart to Heart, arrived in Haiti within the first couple of days after the earthquake. That was just a profoundly affecting experience, and I ended up spending about 3 weeks there at that time. The destruction and the death and the injuries were something that just was almost had to turn your the direction of your life, and that's what it did with me. And so I learned a lot about what I didn't know in the developing world then, even despite some experiences before that. And that led me on to continue the work with Heart to Heart on a regular basis. So first I was a general volunteer. This is just another picture of us when we were providing the healthcare in Haiti. But the other parts of Haiti were just as affecting that were not part of the whole earthquake response. So part of it was the lack of infrastructure that was there. So as soon as we finished the very initial response, I started coming back a couple of times a year. This is both a river and a road. There were a lot of parts in Haiti that you just plain couldn't get to. There just weren't roads there. So people would drive in the rivers. So when the river's down, there were enough patches in there that you could navigate a vehicle to get from place to place. That is until you couldn't navigate anymore. This is a truck that got stuck there. We were about to go drive around it. You can just see where the tire tracks go. And they were rather frantically trying to get the truck back on dry land before the river came up again, which it will do. The rainfalls are pretty unpredictable. So you learn with ways that are going to actually benefit the people. And this is these are two what are called in Haiti fully integrated functioning community federations. It's a clunky term, and it's just as clunky in Creole. But what it is a way of working with the community to give them voice, give them a choice in what they want to do. So those organizations are fully autonomous well, not fully autonomous. They are autonomous organizations under Haitian law that allow them to charge fees, to own land, and basically they are composed of, within a community, the local business leaders, the local religious leaders, any NGOs that are present that are working in that area, political leaders, non-traditional leaders, the church, probably left out some there. But what they're allowed to do is they come together, and we facilitated the foundation of about 21 of these community federations around Haiti, mostly in the area around Leogane and down into the far southeast of the country. And these organizations, once they're founded, can choose to do what they want to do. About a third of them chose to invest in healthcare. So these two, AFP and FOPP, wanted to establish a clinic. So we signed a contract with them. They had to obtain the land, and eventually they were able to lay foundations. We were able to build on top of the foundations and fill out the clinic interior and to get staffing for it. But a lot of other ones would invest in other areas. They would invest in education. One or two invested in road infrastructure in their area. But that was really a way that helps to avoid kind of a paternalistic approach to working in the developing world that really ended up being pretty cool. But with Heart to Heart, I was continually deploying on disasters. Well, not continually, but there were very frequent.
Hi, this is Pete. Can't get to the phone right now. Leave a message. I'll get back to you as quick as I can. Thanks.
At the tone, please record your message.
I will just go. I'm not sure whose that is, but we'll just go past there. So this is the
doctor's office calling remotely today, so this is my cell phone number, but please call the office back at 913-945-8006 so we can get you scheduled for an appointment as soon as possible. Thanks. Look forward to hearing from you soon.
I'm not sure if everybody else heard that, sorry. But this is Tacloban. Tacloban, Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines in 2013 with 220-mile-an-hour sustained winds when it came ashore. That's an EF3 tornado that lasted, literally for hours as it passed over the island. And there were someplace between 5,000 and 7,000 people killed. And you can just see what it did to the trees. So we spent 2 weeks there. And this was just one of the places where we sat up for clinic. We would take our clinic from place to place, depending on other organizations that came in and how quickly the Haitian government was able to, or not Haitian, but the Philippine government was able to reestablish some infrastructure there. So this was a building, it had been an abandoned government building. It was concrete. You can kind of see up at the top a little bit of roof that's still there. And so we just sat up there and did our clinic. But this area we're looking at is actually right behind the clinic, and that sort of cleared area in the center is actually a mass grave, and you can see a makeshift litter that's laid on top of it. There were, by the report, about 17 people that were buried there. And so you always have a reminder of the effects of the storms and the effects of really of the poverty on the risk for the people, because these were all poor people in this area. In 2015, we had the Ebola response. So in 2014, actually, we volunteered to become Heart to Heart volunteered to become one of the first organizations to establish an Ebola treatment unit in Liberia. So we operated there. It was fully operational at the beginning of 2015 through May of 2000.
Families that rely on getting food from these pantries. I don't know.
And so what we used in these situations is we would have to work with USAID.
I mean, I guess
these ETUs basically consume money at a rate of almost $1 million a month. But what they did accomplish without those costs was to keep, one is to control the infection in Liberia. The second was to prevent the infection from traveling back to the US, which was really one of our driving forces in terms of controlling the infection over there. So this is me donning PPU, about ready to go into the treatment units. This is this is just inside the areas we were preparing to go in. And this is one of our night operations. We tried to avoid night operations, just errors can accrue more when you are working at night. But sometimes the patients will actually present to your door in the middle of the night. And so then you have to go and evaluate them and take them into the treatment area under the lights. It was after we completed the Ebola operations that I decided, when I came back, to be the full-time heart-to-heart chief medical officer, and they accepted my desires at that point. When I was during that period of time from January to May, I was the full-time chief medical officer of the Ebola treatment unit, but not of heart-to-heart. So when I came back, I stayed on with heart-to-heart, and it's just been truly a blessing for me. So Haiti always seems to attract disasters. This is in the aftermath of Hurricane Matthew. Came by and basically wiped out all the agricultural produce in the southern peninsula. They caught them right before the harvest. They ruined it. They got rid of the stores, and this entire area became dependent on basically food aid. So this is a line that was waiting for distribution of food. And it's the one time I've been in a food riot because the organization that was distributing the food basically botched it. And this is a picture taken from right outside our clinic. And then, people started yelling, screaming, threatening. And so we had to kind of close the doors, wait for that to blow over. But food insecurity was a huge issue there. And continued on. There were other disasters, actually a lot of disasters in the late 2010s in the US, Hurricane Harvey, Maria, Irma, Michael, Florence, all that. But this is another international response. This was in the Bahamas. So this was just last fall. One of the things you work with when you do disaster response is that you have to be cognizant that even in developing countries, there can be a great deal of prejudice involved. So this was a gentleman, diabetic, who came to our clinic. He was septic, his blood pressure was low, he was not perfusing well, he was just not doing well at all. Tried to get him evacuated. The situation was, though, that he was one of the Haitian migrants that was working in the Bahamas at the time. And the Bahamian government really didn't put much effort into trying to get him medevaced. Eventually, we ended up just calling all around. This one was sort of weird. So eventually a helicopter, we were able to get a medevac helicopter to get him out to Nassau. Very oddly, it ended up being an ICE, immigration control enforcement, that just happened to have a helicopter sitting around in Nassau that was able to come and pick him up and transport him back to the hospital there. So in many of these international responses, you work with the Ministry of Health, you work with the World Health Organization. So we are undergoing verification as an emergency medical team the WHO's Emergency Medical Team Initiative. That was something that was begun after the Haiti earthquake to try and improve the quality of the response. So we worked with them, you invited in to a disaster response by the WHO working with the local Ministry of Health. And so you attend lots of briefings with the Ministry of Health. They get to direct you do, although a lot of times they will defer that to the WHO. So you get to work a lot with international organizations there. You also, when you hang around as long as I have, then you get invited onto some panels. So this was a WHO technical working group on maternal and child care in disasters. So we were developing standards that organizations would adhere to when undergoing the verification as an emergency medical team. And so some of the gigs are good. These were a series of 2 meetings and a lot of work in between that were conducted in Geneva. So yeah, you know, there's some of the some of the places you go are pretty are a little more less stressful than the others. Go back and discuss a little bit about what formed my intents and what basically put me into international response. I have to go back to the time in the Army. So I had 26 years in the Army, 13 active, 13 in the National Guard. And I started at West Point, and I actually had a German minor there. In those days, in the 1970s, we had a huge presence over in Germany, confronting the Soviet Union, across the East-West German border and West German-Czech border. So one of the things about being a German minor, I was able to sit for and become a certified linguist. The military had 3 basic categories of linguist. You had the first level, which was really somebody who could order a beer and not get in trouble. You had the 3rd level, which were your native speakers. Then you had this broad range in the middle, level 2, which I was in. And I could go, so I was able to use it not only just for living in Germany, so we lived for 4.5 years over in Germany, but was able to also, you know, actually part of my duties entailed liaisoning with the German military, particularly the Bundesgrenzschutz, which was the border protection forces for West Germany at the time. And I was married over in Germany. So my fiance came over and basically she stayed, and we got married while we were over there, and our first 2 children were born in Germany. It was an interesting thing. In Germany, you have to be married by the Bürgermeister before you can have a wedding. So you have to go and get your birth certificates and do all that kind of stuff. Well, my wife actually was born in Germany of American military parents before the Status of Forces Agreement. So she actually has a German birth certificate. So it was not an uncommon thing in those days for a GI, American soldier, to go and marry a German lady. So the Bürgermeister, you know, was fairly confident what was going on. So he would go up and he would speak English to me and German to my wife. Of course, my wife didn't speak a word of German. And so then I would have to translate for her. And then I would respond either in German or in English to him. And he just kept getting more and more confused. And we just agreed that, yeah, we'd conduct the rest of the ceremony in English. My wife kids me, though. She says, yeah, she didn't understand all that part about honoring and obeying. So that doesn't apply because it was all in German. So after I completed, I was in the field artillery then. And so I spent, after the 4.5 years over in Germany, I left active duty and went to medical school. And upon completing medical school, I entered back into active duty at Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg, for those who've been in the military, is a very active post. People deploy all the time. A lot of light infantry and special operations forces. And so I was in Even while I was in internship and residency, I was still taking part in airborne jumps. I was actually detailed over to a special operations unit and spent 3 years in that special operations unit, then another 2 years over in the 3rd Special Forces. And so you actually did do a lot of stuff with the with other countries, particularly in special forces. Special forces, for those that aren't aware, is a really it is a interesting organization in that you have to be very culturally aware of where you will deploy. So each group is assigned an area of responsibility. So our area of responsibility was Sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean. So we had one battalion that would speak French, one company that would speak Creole, one battalion speak Spanish. We had another company that spoke Portuguese, and I don't know what the other one was. But so these organizations, these sub-organizations would deploy to these areas, spend a lot of time training local military, developing relationships. And so that got us into the really working with the foreign groups. So this was in Senegal. We went to Senegal for about 2 months, and we trained the Senegalese military in management of trauma. And then went and just really for our good and to work with the government, we saw patients for about a month in the interior. On our way out, we had already loaded up everything, and then there was a Peace Corps training camp up at a city called Ches, and the biggest risk factor for working in the developing world is motor vehicle accidents. And so the Peace Corps volunteers were driving back to Ches, and they had a bad car accident. One had a really bad head injury. The other 2 were banged up pretty badly. And we were called by the embassy to see what we could do. So at that time, there wasn't a functioning CT scanner in the entire country of Senegal. The lady was having enough problems that they already intubated her. And so we had a cargo aircraft that was landing the next day, just a slick, basically nothing on the inside of it. So we went into that aircraft and set up our own ICU in the back of the aircraft. We took the patients. We didn't have a ventilator, so we had to manually basically bag ventilate the lady who was intubated. And we flew them all the way back to Spain and were able to get them up alive to the hospital up in Madrid. But yeah, you work with the local Peace Corps, the State Department, and all the rest when you're doing that. So after that period of time, I left active duty, came back to Kansas City, and stayed in the National Guard. Then came the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and I was activated to go over as part of the National Guard. And this was another strange time where you would, just strange things happen in the military sometimes. So I was stationed at a place called Camp Ashraf. So we would go into the countryside, try to act as basically decoys for the insurgents, so that the intelligence people could talk to informants. And so my goal was to actually be the cover for going out there, which was to take care of local patients. The site we were at was Camp Ashraf. It was the home of the Mujahideen al-Khalq, which is a Marxist Muslim Iranian organization that was on the European and the US terror list. We had the big guns, but they outnumbered us about 7 to 1 on the post. But we were going through this real weird dance where we were trying to figure out what the relationship of the US was with these people. Now, the Mujahideen al-Khalq, or called MEK, had been the ones who led the takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in '79. But they had a big falling out with Ayatollah Khomeini, who killed about 35,000 of their members one weekend, and so they fled across the Met fled across the border into Iraq, and Saddam Hussein, who always loved harassing Iranians, set them up there near the border, and they played this cat and mouse game across the border, assassinating presidents and stuff like that. They really were a true terrorist organization. They took over the Iranian embassy in London in, I think it was '92. But they saw they're very much pragmatists. They saw who was in charge in Iraq, and so they wanted to make up with us. And so we had this very strange dance where we were negotiating with them, trying to see if there are any members who are still there who had taken over our embassy in '79, looking for weapons of mass destruction, which was a big deal in those days. Never found any. So, it was sort of strange. So yeah, that was part of the thing. When we were over in Liberia, I was negotiating with warlords regarding disposition of equipment, stuff like that. Over here, I'm negotiating with terrorists. Just sort of broadens your range of experiences a bit. Back in Haiti, go back a little bit too. There was the nutrition was always a problem there. You can see sanitation with the nutrition was also an issue. But a lot of malnutrition. So I was also involved with and on the board for an organization that was fighting malnutrition in Haiti. So we used a sort of at the time a revolutionary treatment called ready-to-use therapeutic food. In Haitian, it was called Medicamamba. It's basically a super enriched peanut butter, and it's been shown to reduce the rate of death in children who had severe acute malnutrition by about 80%. Just truly a magnificent, wonderful invention. So we got to use that there. This child right here is malnourished. You can tell there's likely skin complected. You can see how thin her upper arms and her thighs are. The sparse hair and thinning hair and kind of a little bit lighter colored. It's just one of the characteristics that you'll see there. So she is eating 2 crackers with some Medicamamba in it, and that was a really rewarding part of working in Haiti. But you fold in other things that can really, other threads. So one of the things, this was I worked with Rotary International. I've been a member of Rotary for about 15 years. And so you find things that just fold together. So this was Typhoon Haiyan, and it was the Rotary Club of Leyte Gulf. And so Rotary has had a big effect on what I've been able to do internationally as well. So I have a lot of meetings. I'm part of an organization of environmentalists that's worldwide, that's affiliated with Rotary, called the Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group. And so these are some members that we have. Senator gentleman is from Poland, and I think one's from, I can't remember, another Eastern European country, and another gentleman from the United States. And so you get to work with and really meet people, and they're pretty cool folks. And it also entails other opportunities to go do things. So I was I led a medical exchange into Kenya and Uganda, again in 2013. So this happens to be a picture from a giving away ceremony, which is done prior to the wedding ceremony in Uganda. Uganda has over 100 recognized official tribal languages. And so one of the problems they run into is that sometimes the people will, many of the languages are mutually unintelligible. So this is a case where you had a gentleman from the north who was marrying a lady from the south, and so the languages didn't coincide. So they conducted the entire ceremony in English, which was really cool to listen to. All the banter, which is the trading of goods, which is just all symbolic, but, you know, we'll bring beer or cognac or whatever and trade it back and forth to, you know, arrive on the bride price, and then, you know, then they have the wedding the next day. So part of it was the traditional dancers, which the people were amazing. Then there was this older gentleman who's right in the back in the center who came up and joined in some of the dances. It was really, it was pretty cool. But other parts of the visits were not as picturesque. So this is the Lunga Lunga slum in Nairobi. It's not as famous as Kibera. It's a little bit smaller, but it's just as poor. The conditions are just as desperate. Interestingly enough, it's more of a transient kind of place than a prolonged slum. Over 80% of the people have not lived in the slum all their life, so it's not a generational type dwelling in the slum. It's more of a way that people that come in from the countryside to try and establish work stay there for a number of years and then move on to a place of better accommodations. But we got to work with Rotary organizations inside the Lunga slums. We're working for really helping the people and bettering the conditions there. Part of the medical exchange was, I mean, we got to go into the hospitals, treat people. This was up at the Zambia Hospital in Uganda, in Kampala. And this was the medical director, my team, and the chief of nursing there. The fun thing about this is in the background right here was some structures that were being constructed. That was a Rotary Cancer Center. So there was not an organized cancer center in all of Uganda for a country of, about 35 million people. No single place actually conducted cancer treatment. So Rotary saw that as a need and was working to try and develop the cancer center. So this was 2013. And 2017, I think, this is what Rotary produced. And we actually had a chance to take part in that. I had written up a grant to go through Rotary International and eventually through a number of leverages, get about $900,000 worth of medical supplies and equipment for this cancer center. So really cool. We got to actually see one of the deliveries, one of the shipping containers came in while we were there. Got to actually take part in a little ceremony on that. So it was pretty cool. Other things that are outside of organizations are fun too. This is, we just took an opportunity, my wife and I, we'd always wanted to do it. This was hiking the Camino de Santiago over in, starting in Portugal and working our way up to northwest Spain into the city of Santiago. Long-term pilgrimage route, been present since about 900. Routes were really established over Roman roads. You'll actually see Roman road markers. It's a gorgeous part of Spain and Portugal, and actually the weather is much nicer than you kind of expect for Spain in summer, particularly in early to mid-June. It's actually kind of cool. You can see wearing jackets and stuff like that too. Now this doesn't look a whole lot like international stuff, but this is actually, I was a rugby player from age 20 to 35. And so this is the Fort Bragg rugby team on the right playing the 2nd British Parachute Regiment. We had gone over to Britain on tour and got to work with the, working with the British Army. It's sort of, I actually got to socialize with the British Army, but we did find out lots of interesting stuff with that when we were playing. We stayed in the British officer clubs, which are really kind of residences, really kind of cool. You go sit down to a formal dinner, you have to wear a coat and tie and all that. And then they bring out the regimental silver, which is not place wear settings. It's actually a rather large silver replica of a horse-drawn cannon that was basically minted in celebration of the Battle of Waterloo. So they haul that out. And it's just kind of cool that you're there. But other things where the people we were playing were also airborne as we were. In other words, parachute soldiers. So the next day, we got to go through the British jump school. We'd all were experienced jumpers, but to go through the British jump school was pretty cool because you got to jump out of these helium balloons, tethered helium balloons, which was just something that none of us had ever done before. For people that have jumped in the military, it's a little bit different because you have no opening shock. This is obviously taken a little bit. The jumps were probably under 1,000 foot, and you have a 6-second count till you get to any kind of opening shock at all, which made people very nervous. We had some of our high altitude parachutists that were going, "Oh my God, I pulled my reserve, 2,000 foot before this," and it was kind of fun seeing them nervous. But yeah, you get to do that and working with the British Army, and then they gave you British jump wings, and it's kind of fun. And you can do things through your church too, and that's what we did. This was an evaluation of the environmental situation in Costa Rica and Guatemala. This was actually at the site of a mine that had been polluting all the surface water around the city of La Poya, and people here were involved in trying to close the mine, keep it closed. We were there actually to provide some sort of cover for them, so we were wearing our badges and all the rest so that there wouldn't be any repercussions from anybody that had been hired by the mine or that had been there for any other reason. So I am available for any kind of questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Randolph. It sounds like you have had a fascinating life. We have a few questions in the queue that I'll go ahead and read to you now. So John Antel, thanks you for your service, both through the military and through your work improving healthcare around the world. His question is, where is the balance in providing for essential needs to stabilize the situation versus leading to long-term sustainability without being reliant on outside funding? He says, an example of long-term sustainability could be Haiti International, which provides livestock that could be rebred. So if you could speak a bit on that according to your experience, that would be great.
Sure. Good question. And it's always going to be a little bit of a struggle for organizations like we have, because we're probably a little more flexible in some ways. And we've gone both ways with this. So in disaster response, you have 3 phases of disaster response. So you have the initial response, which is sort of akin in first aid to stopping the bleeding. That's where you go in and you keep things from getting worse. So in these cases, medical response, the local, either the situation overwhelms the local medical establishment or the local medical establishment is affected as well, so that the people have significant unmet needs for health care. So you go in there and we go in there in those situations, we provide the medications for free, the healthcare for free, and the rest of this. So then you'll transition to a recovery mode. So this is where you try to get the healthcare system back up to a situation where it was before the disaster. Some of these places like Haiti, it may not be that much higher than it was, at the height of the disaster. But you have all these things you have to consider. One is when you're leaving. So what we would do when we transitioned from initial response to recovery is that we hired local Haitian physicians and Haitian staff, and we would actually start charging some money to the people who would come there for healthcare. One of the problems that you run into, and that is a common problem, and even organizations as big as MSF kind of blow this sometimes, is that if they continue to provide healthcare for free, then they will drive all the local healthcare providers out of the system. It's hard to compete with free. And so we started charging a small amount, sending the money back over to the local organizations we were working with. And MSF actually came up, and they, as part of their thing, is to not charge any fees. And so for the folks that were operating in their area, they just basically, they drove them out. And then when MSF left, then there was nobody there to take up the slack. So that's a tricky part when you go from response, I mean, from initial response to recovery, that you need to be able to nurture that local system to get that functioning at least to, you know, the level that it was at before the disaster. Then you go into development. And so in Haiti, we stayed there and we worked on development. So a lot of the things with the fully functioning, fully integrated federal, the fully integrated functioning community federations was all development work. And we just felt called to be able to continue that. And we're still in Haiti, we're still working there now. And we've done similar things in Puerto Rico and the Bahamas. So we're continuing to work there. But in other places that we've gone, Philippines, Nepal, Liberia, once the response, once our the initial response and some of the recovery was done, then we left. So, you know, so it becomes very individualized both to the situation and to the organization.
All right. Another question we have is, how much of a barrier is language in being able to serve local populations? Is working with an interpreter an obstacle to your practice?
Interpreters are absolutely necessary when you're in some place that's outside of your area, and even in places like the Bahamas, which English is the primary language. It can be necessary because some of the local populations, subpopulations in there, for example, there's a large group of the Creole, the Haitian migrants who need to have Creole speakers. But even in places that are English, like Liberia. Liberia has modeled itself, and it was actually effectively a US colony in West Africa. And the English is the primary language that unites all the different tribal languages. And, but it continued to evolve. If you've ever tried to listen to all the different varieties of English that are out there, Liberian is the strangest one that I've run into. There was a hospital outside of our Ebola treatment unit, and you'd hear this guy going on at the gate for the hospital going, "Wayohan, Wayohan." You basically tell that to everybody up there. So, you know, what in the world is that? It's wash your hands. So they drop the last consonant, make things very nasal. And then you have to try and, you know, figure out what the word was. If you go further out, you go to Grand Cru, then the R's become L's. And they still drop the last consonant. And so somebody said once, I take a load on a load, which was I take a load on the road, or basically driving someplace. And so it's technically English, but boy, you need your local people to translate their English into your English. So we have people that are fluent in Spanish, but a lot of times when you go someplace, when we went to Mozambique, you have to find a translator, usually ideally through the WHO. They're supposed to have a list of translators that you can use. And get somebody who speaks Portuguese. It's always a challenge. It's always necessary, but sometimes you're reduced to, you know, frankly, if you don't have enough translators, you're reduced to almost pantomime sometimes, and which is, I'm sure, would be very entertaining on YouTube video, but it's just not real comfortable all the time.
I have a question as well, so that we received. What advice would you give to young professionals who are aspiring to work in international healthcare, or to mid-career professionals who are looking to try and go internationally as well? How to enter that? How to find opportunities? Kind of what advice would you give there?
You know, the first is to be open to possibilities to go places. So things that, you know, a lot of times it'll take you a little bit outside your comfort zone. So if you have an opportunity to go on an exchange someplace, jump at it. You know, it's the experience of meeting people in their own homes and their own businesses in a different country that will really provide the spark to go further and to get even more involved. Sometimes it just you know, doing things that you would normally do. So playing rugby gave me a chance to go over to England. Actually, we toured twice over there. And you get to make all sorts of contacts. Other ones are that you just meet people like we did on the first, the medical exchange to Uganda. And then we were able to work with them later at a distance to get the supplies for their cancer center. So just be open to different possibilities, even in the things that you normally do day to day. And then that will give you a chance to go and to develop something more internationally. Certainly language skills help. So if you are you know, in school, being able to concentrate on languages right now, I would say probably German doesn't help a whole lot when in my line of work anymore, but certainly Spanish, Portuguese, French, so much of particularly the northern and western Africa is francophone. They speak French. You know, is handy. So you know, that is helpful also.
What advantages or disadvantages are there to working from Kansas City in the work that you do? Does being in Kansas City not make a difference, or is it harder or easier to find opportunities?
Okay, Kansas City. We are not the mecca of disaster response. And we've had actually some really good people at Heart to Heart that have moved on to you know, DC and other places where there are bigger organizations. So you know, there are some drawbacks to being in Kansas City, but you know, for us, it's not really an issue. You know, this is where we are from. Heart to Heart was actually founded out of a Rotary meeting when the speaker didn't show. So our founder, Gary Morse, was a member of, I think it was Olathe Rotary, and their speaker didn't show. So everybody, knowing Gary likes to talk, said, "Hey, tell us about this, you know, this mission trip you were on." And Gary basically stood up and spoke for 20 minutes extemporaneously, and you know, we have a huge need for people out there. There's a lot of people who need, you know, who have a need to help others, but we're having a hard time putting those together. We need an organization that will help put together the people that want to help and the people who need help. And everybody just clapped at the end of that and said, "Yes, Gary, and you need to do that now." And so he, with a couple others there, founded Heart to Heart at that point. But you know, other than that, we're not a mecca, but we have a reputation. You know, we are recognized internationally within the disaster response community. You know, we are I don't know what else. We are a player. Okay.
Have you seen religion work as a bridge or a barrier in accessing populations that might be skeptical about your work?
We were founded by people who, Gary and others, were very strong in their Nazarene denomination. And we actually found that to be both an advantage and a disadvantage. And so, gosh, maybe 10 years ago, we made explicit that we were non-denominational, not even non-denominational. We describe ourselves as being faith-friendly. So we are an organization that allows people of any faith or of no faith to express their religious calling to help others through our organization. And that allows us to be able to respond to places that other organizations, other really good organizations, Samaritans First, will not be able to respond to non-Christian areas anywhere near as easily as we can get in. So, and it also diversifies our board. You know, so we work with a number of different religious organizations of different denomination, actually different belief systems, to allow us to help more people that way.
We have a question from Tim Sweeney. As currently working in medical relief and having been stationed in Berlin, what is your knowledge and perspective of the United States food drop into Berlin before your time, as it affected views and policy of international relief then and for the future?
A couple different ways of providing relief, and then often they're melded. So you have you know, both official relief systems. So when the drop of the food supply to Berlin, and I think it was 49, I guess, 48, 49, was done by the, you know, it was a government program, very deliberate, very involved, and so costly it would be something that you wouldn't be able to do with a private organization. Most of the rest of, you know, that I've been involved with have been private organizations that have been responding with either U.S. government or large multinational organization support. So when we went into Liberia, we were under contract to USAID, which is just a quirky thing that you need. You know, if you ever had to work with USAID contracts, they are incredibly picky about what they fund, what they don't fund, and that sort of thing. It's a lot of times it's easier to respond, you know, with your own assets, and so we respond with our assets. We raise money to respond, and we'll work with other organizations, International Organizational Migration, work with World Food Program, other organizations like that when we go in to respond. You know, the UN will coordinate these things. They call them clusters. Very first time I ran into the medical cluster or stopped in the food cluster down in Haiti, I understood maybe a different use of the term cluster or different meaning for term cluster. And that's sort of what it resembled there. But it's actually, it has improved over time. And working with the Pan American Health Organization, for example, which is the WHO in the Western Hemisphere, is actually, they do a pretty good job.
All right. Let's see, where did the question go? Oh, yes. How do logistics work for gaining access to medical equipment and infrastructure that might not be available in a particular location? I know you'd mentioned in your presentation the time when you were working with the Peace Corps volunteers, and you were, you know, using kind of a handmade ventilator. What is that like in today?
You know, I think there are two parts to that. One is, you know, what do you know, working with kind of limited medical supplies that we can go in with. A lot of times, you know, we go, our requirements are to be on the ground, fully functioning, fully stocked for a 2-week period and arrive 72 hours after the disaster occurs. You know, that really puts a big strain on our ability to be able to transport things. So a lot of the things, times when we deploy that way, we're limited more by transport than necessarily logistics. That said, Heart to Heart is a really, in some ways, it's a logistics organization on which the disaster response has kind of been grafted. We started out more as a, you know, really our disaster response started with Katrina, and we've been in operation for 10 years before there as primarily a logistics organization. So we have an ability to get medicines, get medical supplies. We get these medicines and supplies from companies that will support us. You know, we get donations. We're able to move these donations. We act as sort of a clearinghouse for the medicines and supplies to get them to organizations that go on mission trips, go on that have established hospitals in the developing world, or even like in the U.S. to free clinics and that sort of thing.
So we'll probably be wrapping this up soon. I do have a question for you in case we get any fun questions. I'll grab them as well. But oh, actually, looks like we just got another one. Are hygiene kits used in every mission?
No, hygiene kits are not used in, obviously somebody familiar with our hygiene kit bills. We don't use them in all missions, but they are used in missions that also, we use them in some, and we use them in missions in which there is not a need for a medical response. And so typically when we go someplace, the local medical infrastructure has to be compromised enough, or there has to be enough of a disaster that there's that mismatch between ability to provide medical care and need. But a lot of these disasters will occur in such a way that that doesn't happen, but there's still disaster. People are still displaced, people still in shelters. And we use the hygiene kits to help people in these types of settings where we don't have to, or there's not a need for us to provide medical care, but people really need at least something to be able to get clean with, to brush their teeth in the morning, be able to have a hand towel and some soap to clean themselves off, and provide a little bit of a little bit of encouragement that way, as well as trying to reduce hygiene related health problems. But there are other ones that we will respond to, particularly inside the U.S. when we go down to Hurricane Harvey in Texas, or down in Puerto Rico, where we're distribution of the hygiene kits is an integral part of what we're doing as we provide healthcare.
Well, I want to be mindful of everyone's time today. Are there any final thoughts you have, Dr. Randolph, on your career in international healthcare and crisis response that you would like to share with the group?
I hadn't really thought on that part. It's funny when you become involved in some of these areas. It really does shape. It shapes you. It's more than you doing something. It starts to shape the way you look at things. And so, in terms of medical response, that's how people see me, and that's how I see me. And that I really hadn't kind of expected or hadn't planned or anything like that. But it does become part of who you are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for joining us for today's event. We want to thank Dr. Randolph so much for donating his time and providing some very interesting information about your career history. We'd also like to thank all of you for your continued support of the IRC and these wonderful questions. If you've enjoyed today's event, we encourage you to consider joining us as a member or to make a donation by texting IRC to the number in the chat box. Thank you again, Dr. Randolph, and everyone who's been here. It is 12:59, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Randolph. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. There should be a live recording of this event on our Facebook page that will go up sometime today, so you'll be able to view it in the future if you'd like to come back. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Natalie.